What's up, binge watchers? Welcome back to the channel. For today's video, I'll be talking about the Netflix crime, drama, mystery, horror series called The Irregulars, created by Tom Bidwell. This one is based on a group of characters called the Baker Street Irregulars, coming from the mind of the one and only Arthur Conan Doyle. You might have known him as the author of Sherlock Holmes novels. I think this group appears in one or two of the novels. Anyway, this show focuses on a group of teenagers, they're street children, and they're being hired by Dr. John Watson, aka the partner in crime of Sherlock Holmes, to investigate a series of paranormal crimes and murders happening all over the Victorian set London. Now, before I continue with this review, I invite you guys to please hit that like button and subscribe to us if you want some weekly reviews of movies and TV shows. We've been doing a lot of Netflix content, so if you're down for that content, go ahead and subscribe to us. Now, I gotta say, I love Sherlock Holmes. I watched almost every adaptation of Sherlock Holmes that's out there, whether it's movies or series, and mainly because I'm fascinated by a character that seems to have knowledge of how to solve these mysteries, this fantastic brain of his, and just because I really like watching characters with, geniuses in the forefront. Now, I don't have the stats to back this up, but I think Sherlock Holmes is the most adapted literary character. I believe so, because just last year we get the spin-off. We have here Enola Holmes, the younger sister of Sherlock, and in this show, even if he's not the main character, you can still feel his presence for most of the episodes. He does appear, however, in the halfway through the season and impacts the story in such a significant way. So when we say about Sherlock Holmes, the first thing that comes to our mind is science and logic, deduction. And that's why I'm really fascinated on how they're going to do this, because there's magic, there's supernatural beings in this show. So how are they going to explore and mesh those two seemingly opposing themes? Honestly, I've watched the trailer and I don't really have the high expectations for this show, because this show seems to be a lot. Truthfully, after I watched first episode, it seems to be a product of Netflix algorithm. We have here teen drama. We have here a mystery for those who want something intelligent, some macabre elements, a period piece show, and if you watch Netflix shows like Stranger Things, Bridgerton, I would also have to add Game of Thrones, because there's an arc here that resembles the arc of the Faceless Men. Anyway, and even The Crown, because there's one character here who has a storyline of love versus duty. So needless to say, this show attempts to be multifaceted, and it's really a tough thing to do, because I'm gonna pull out an example, Lovecraft Country. I love that show from last year, and it's really amazing how that show managed to pull off different elements from sci-fi, horror, the mystery, then there's social drama into a one coherent vision. So that's not an easy task, and it's one thing to be multifaceted, and it's another thing to feel cluttered and messy, and unfortunately, this is what I can say for the Irregulars. It almost feels like they're ticking off a lot of boxes here, and I was just disappointed because none of those elements, they don't really form into a one singular coherent vision. It just feels like a mess. Honestly, I got that impression on episode 1. I thought the direction feels flat. The pacing and the editing feels way off for me. There's a lot of tonal clashes here. The biggest problem for me here is that this show is bugged by its unnecessary teen drama. We got a lot of teen angst. We have here a tedious love triangle. I felt like the show is trying to cater to everyone until it becomes a show that caters specifically to no one. It's unfortunate, because I'm not the biggest fan when it comes to the teen drama, and they're using here some cringy dialogues, and I really don't like it when period pieces use modern soundtracks. They mostly play it here whenever there's some romance part. Some pop romantic music will play and it just takes you out of it. Like, I can forgive some of the instances where they use synth here in the musical scoring, but maybe it's just a personal choice for me, And then the mystery here featuring a monster of the week. Though none of the elements here per se are original or something that's groundbreaking, but it can still be entertaining and compelling to watch had they executed this properly and just trim the runtime, because we have here almost 1 hour of runtime, and honestly, I think this show could have done it with 40 minutes by trimming those unnecessary teen drama that I've mentioned earlier. Now let's talk about the characters from the Sherlock Holmes. First, Dr. John Watson, portrayed by the South African actor Royce Pierreson, so there's a deviation in that. Maybe it's one of those instances where they're trying to change up the race of the character. I believe John Watson is already done in a gender bender twist in this show called Elementary. He's played by the Asian actress Lucy Liu, so I'm not going to judge too quickly in here, but once this character steps in episode 1 and we get to know him, I wouldn't categorize this character as someone who's amiable and someone who's level-headed. It's a very different John Watson because he's bitter that Sherlock Holmes left him for unexplained reasons. He's a bit rude to this group of teenagers that we have here. He's also somewhat of a charismatic manipulator. Almost feels like this is the Sherlock Holmes. So it's definitely interesting, but I have to say I'm not used to see Dr. Watson in such an unlikable role. And then into the issue of diversity. I'm all for switching the gender and the races. The protagonist here, Beatrice, is an Asian girl. Maybe it's sending a message that not only white people can solve mysteries, other races too. So I'm fine with that. But by the end of it, I'm not entirely convinced why they have to change the race of the character, apart from meeting that minimum requirement nowadays that your cast needs to be diverse. It feels like a half-hearted attempt. And then Sherlock here, this is a very different Sherlock from what we know, because this is the weakest version of Sherlock, I can say, not in terms of performances, but because in terms of the mental state of the character, because in here he's been bogged down by some traumatic event and he's been troubled by a lot of demons of his past. He has resorted to using drugs more frequently now, and this character really has fallen from his grace, and it's quite odd to see him in such a fragile and vulnerable state. I don't think that this is the smartest version of Sherlock. In here, he has done some errors in his judgment, and I know Sherlock is far from perfect, but you know, for the most part, Sherlock is right. Sherlock is the smartest person in the room. So if you are a Sherlock purist, you might not like this one, the way they treated this character, but considering the circumstances that he is in this series, it's quite appropriate. The actor here, Henry Lloyd-Hughes, I respect his performance because he has his own charisma, which is different from what Benedict Cumberbatch or what Robert Downey Jr. has brought. Let's just say it's still fun that he still managed to retain his sense of arrogance, even though he's not in the best mental shape for a Sherlock character. Then we also have here the deduction cases, because this is a Sherlock show in a way. So the way they have resolved these episodes, sometimes, and you know, for the most part, it feels not too satisfying because there's not really much deduction going in here since we're dealing about supernatural stuff. Most of our characters here, our teenagers here, are mostly reacting to the things that are thrown at them, and one character here has a special ability. She's a clairvoyant, and most of the time these conflicts are resolved by using her powers. If you're looking for a mystery show that really relies on the wits and intellect, I think you'll be disappointed if you're going to expect that from this show. And then there are other Sherlock Holmes characters that appear in this series: Inspector Lestrade, Mrs. Hudson, Mycroft Holmes, and the one thing that they all have in common is their rude versions of themselves. It almost feels repulsive the way that they have portrayed these characters because they're always rude to the teenagers of the show. So I'm really not liking these versions of these characters. It almost feels like the Sherlock lore is a bit disgraced because I don't understand if they're really needed there in the first place, because it eventually uses the Sherlock lore to hook in the audiences, which can be misleading because in the end this seems to be like completely different characters. And it's a shame because there's a good story buried beneath all of this mess. There is a theme of grief that looms over the entire episodes. I think they should have focused on that because grief can change you. Grief can do you a lot of bad things. When you're in pain, one instinct is to inflict pain to another, to seek revenge. And that's what's happening here for the villains per each episode. And what's wonderful is that the theme of grief is not limited to the villains of the show. It's also passed on to the main characters here, because in here we have Beatrice and Jessie. They are the protagonist siblings played by Thaddea Graham and Darci Shaw. B here is resourceful, she's determined, she's quite spunky, and Jessie here is the more fragile one. She's having these nightmares and she's gifted with this clairvoyant psychic powers. Since the show doesn't really work on a teen drama angle, you know, when you get that love triangle, it works best when you focus on their relationship as siblings. That is one of the key points that the show succeeds. We have our other three boys, Leopold, Billy, and Spike. So I'm not completely convinced that the show handled these three boys, because by the end you can sense that the show does not know what to do with them. But as a whole, these five, it generally works because we have here a lot of gothic elements, and it would be a downer if everything else is dark. It's like their friendship is the heart and the life of the show. So I think that is one of the aspects that work. Those actors, I think they're really talented, though I'm not going to say that those performances are exactly memorable for me because of the clashing tones and all of it. Sometimes the acting suffers. So overall, I would have to say the Irregulars, there's nothing really groundbreaking here in terms of acting, script, or the direction. The last two in particular, I think they just fell flat. It doesn't feel like a fully fleshed idea for me. It's a show that it does not know what it wants to be. There are some episodes where it mostly focuses on the paranormal aspects. Then there are some episodes where it mostly focuses on the romance and the family aspect. I have a friend before that said that Netflix is not the best home for adapting genre fiction, and I have to say the same here, because I can really envision this, that if this go to HBO, maybe they can chop off some of the parts that work and focus on the dark, harrowing themes. This will be an entirely different show, and I don't think that the treatment of the creatives behind this show are able to pull off the vision that they wanted it to be. So unfortunately, I have to give this one a 2 out of 5 stars. So that's it for my review of The Irregulars, now streaming on Netflix. Have you seen this show? Will you try to see this show after watching this review? Let me know what you think in the comment sections down below. If you enjoyed watching this video, please give me a like and subscribe to us for weekly content. Thank you so much guys for watching. Until then, see you on the next one.